One of my favorite stories is about a man. Now, this man is walking down a path and finds an egg, an eagle's egg. He takes this egg and puts it into the nest of a backyard hen. Pretty soon, the eagle hatches with the chicks and grows up with them. Now, all his life, that eagle did what the chickens did. He would poke around in the dirt looking for worms and insects to eat. He would fly a few feet into the air like chickens do, and he'd cluck around. And as time passed, that eagle, he grew very old. And one day, he saw something above him. This thing, it glided gracefully and majestically through the clouds. "What's that?" the eagle says. "Oh, that's an eagle," one chicken responds. "He is the king of all birds, the master of the skies. But we belong to the ground because we are just chickens. Don't worry about him. You will never be that." And that eagle lived and died a chicken because that is what he thought he was.
I dare you, chicken. I'm not a chicken. I'll do it. I'm not a coward. I'm not a chicken. I'll eat it. See? Brings us right back to our childhood. We've all called someone a chicken. We've all been called a chicken. Maybe you called your brother a chicken 1,000 times, or you called a friend a chicken 1,000,000 times, or a sister. I think as adults, in one way or another, and go with me for a second, we're chickens. Smartphone in one claw, iPad or device in another claw, dinging, ringing, email, missed Instagram updates, more emails, missed soccer practice, canceled soccer practice, 6 emails from your boss, canceled meeting, 6 more alerts, and if you're like me, you've got 97 alarms going off for no good reason all day, and your coworkers don't know why, and it's going off in your office, and you're not in your office, and it's stressing me out just thinking about it. 2017 was labeled the year of anxiety. In 2017, we had nuclear war threats at an all-time high. We had natural disasters ravage our country and ravage the world around us. We had all kinds of crazy things happen. We had net neutrality. I don't even know what side I'm on. Now you have your teenagers saying to you, "Mom, Dad, invest in Bitcoin." You're like, "I don't even know where these coins are and how to collect these little coins." The stress, it can overwhelm you. The anxiety, it can attack you. The depression, it can weigh you down. The failures, they can freaking tear your family apart. And the discouragement, it can trap you, can't it? Over and over again, the discouragement. And it can keep you right here in your safe place, in your safe space. I don't know what your safe space is. And you don't have to close your eyes, but maybe it's your sofa. Maybe it's that living room. Maybe it's that routine that you've been in. Maybe it's that rut that you've gotten yourself into over the last couple of years. Maybe it's that job where you had opportunity to advance and you didn't. Maybe it's that friend group that you should, expand and you're not willing to. What's that safe place, that comfort zone that you've gotten yourself into? Your place, your comfort zone. My challenge for all of you this morning is to leave your comfort zone, to soar out of your comfort zone and into the danger zone this morning. Some of you are looking at me this morning and you're saying, "Young pastor, I've been flying since before you were born." And I would like to say, very respectfully, I do think there is a difference between flying and soaring. I think that while you can fly, you are not necessarily soaring. And while you may have been flying for all these years, you may not have been soaring for all these years. And you may not have been soaring to your full potential for all of these years. And that's our key idea this morning. Our key idea is this morning. You can't soar with the eagles until you take the necessary baby steps out of the nest. I've learned a couple of things working with high school students, our high school students here at the Grove. And one of those is this principle. Baby steps. And if you take baby steps, you will have great success. Baby steps, great success for me. Baby steps, great success for you. And baby steps, great success for all of us. And so what I want to say is this morning. If we all take a couple baby steps this morning, I think that we will have great success. 3 baby steps this morning for all of us in this room, and I think we're all going to be soaring to new heights in 2018, new places that you thought you could never go, new adventures you thought you would never go on, the book you thought you'd never write. Our passage comes to us this morning from the Old Testament. It comes to us from Judges chapter 6, a Bible character named Gideon. Gideon was a warrior of God. Gideon was a great warrior who conquered kingdoms and kings and thousands of men, thousands upon thousands. He's known as one of the great warriors in the Bible. But before Gideon was a warrior, Gideon was also a world-class worrier. I worry a lot about my hair, and I worry about my outfits, and I worry about my shoes, and I probably shouldn't, but I worry. How many of us worry? You don't have to raise your hand. But I think we're world-class worriers. Gideon was an average man, and he worried a lot. And it says in Judges 6:11 that an angel came to Gideon. And the angel of the Lord, in verse 11, came and sat down under an oak in Oprah. You see, Oprah had towns before she even had towns. And it belonged to Josh, Gideon's dad, where the son, Gideon, was threshing wheat. He's just working. He's just at work. And he's threshing wheat in his winepress down in the basement to keep it hidden from the Midianites. And in verse 14, the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in strength. You have to save our country, Israel, out of the Midianites' hand. Am I not sending you, Gideon?" And in verse 15, Gideon looks at God, and Gideon says to God, "Yo, what? Think you got the wrong guy, God. My brother, yoked out guy, has a lot of money and a big house. I think he has some military experience. That's the guy." You see, Gideon grew up in a period of time where the Medes, the Midianites, had been oppressing them for hundreds of years. They had been going to war with them and defeating them and defeating them and defeating them and pillaging them and taking everything from them. Battle after battle, they took everything. And the Jewish nation had nothing. That's why Gideon is working in his basement, because at any time they could take anything from him. They were like the Cleveland Browns of football. They couldn't win a game. They were 0-16 year after year. And so when Gideon hears this from God, he's like, "Yeah, God, I don't know if you know this, but not only have we not made the playoffs in a few years, we can't even win a game." And God says, "You're my guy." You see, Gideon had some discouragements. Because I think when you lose someone in your life, when you have health problems, when you lose a job, when your job's not working out like it should have, when maybe your education didn't work out like you thought, or your relationship's not working out like you thought, you get discouraged. And that discouragement turns into more discouragement and more doubts about God, doesn't it? And when you have more doubts about God, something starts to happen, doesn't it? you start to push God out of your life. Slowly at first, but then over time, God's not even in the picture, and you push him out, and you push him out, and you get pushed further and further into your wine press, and you're sitting further and further in your basement. And that's what happened with Gideon. And Gideon's sitting in his wine press, and he's threshing his wheat, and he's working where he shouldn't have been working. When you thresh wheat in those times, you thresh wheat outside. You never thresh wheat indoors. But Gideon is so scared, and he has so much anxiety in his life that he's working in a basement. That's how much anxiety Gideon had. And he stares out of his cellar window at what could have been, at what should have been, at what might have been. Staring out the window. Look at your neighbor next to you this morning. Say, stop staring. You see, Gideon's dreams had been popped. Gideon was down in his basement. He let all the doubts of life and all the discouragements push him down to his basement. Because he let them take him there. And that's our first principle this morning. That's our first step, is you gotta stop staring. Take that step with me. Stop staring. You gotta stop staring. You can say that again. Stop staring. I love this line from God. God looks at Gideon, and God meets Gideon in his basement. And it's like a line out of a movie. God looks at Gideon, and he says this. It's very profound and theological. He says, I got your back, Gideon. It doesn't say that. It says, in verse 15, it says, in verse 16, I will be with you. I will be with you, Gideon. You see, when God says this to Gideon, he says, I will be with you, something happens to Gideon. Gideon's whole life, he's like, I can't do anything. I'm just a guy from a Jewish nation. I don't have much. I work in a basement all day. And when God says, I will be with you, Gideon's whole perspective changes. His whole heart changes. His mind changes. And he realizes that God might have something more in store for him. Maybe a new job. Maybe a new future. And Gideon begins to take a step towards his destiny. And the whole trajectory of his life begins to change in that moment. In 1899, the Wright brothers began to build some of the first prototypes for their airplanes. And they started building them in Dayton, Ohio, in Wright Cycle Exchange, in a bike shop. And they built, and they built, and they built. And the airplanes at first sputtered and popped and pinged, and they crashed because the aerodynamics were a little bit off and the engines were underpowered and the wind wasn't quite right in Ohio. But the brothers, they took notes and they collaborated with one another and they went back to the bike shop and they kept working on their airplanes. Step number 2 is this. Step up to the challenge. The brothers built airplanes in a bicycle shop. Sometimes you have to use what you've got. Sometimes you have to use what you've got. What resources are in your bicycle shop? Yeah, Byron, but I barely have an education, and it's just a small degree. Byron, I don't have hardly any funds. Actually, I have negative funds, and I'm still paying back my loan. Byron, I'm trying to start that business, but my employees. Byron, you don't understand. I don't even have a bike. I'm walking everywhere. In Luke 16:10, it says this. It says, whoever is faithful in a very little thing is also faithful in much. The brothers didn't say, if only we had an airplane manual. If only we had Boeing's service hotline. If only we had the right airplane engine, we could really take off here in Ohio. They just kept building, they kept tinkering until they perfected it. They stepped up to the challenge in their bike shop, and they changed the world. I'll close with this. After I gave my life to the Lord, I had what you might call a Gideon moment. You see, Gideon decided to give his life to the Lord, and he stepped up to the challenge. But Gideon, like a lot of us, when we give our lives to the Lord, you have that moment where you're like, all right, God, I'm in. But then doubts start to come, right? It's normal. And Gideon starts to doubt whether or not it's actually God. So he takes a blanket outside and says, God, if this is really you, make everything on the ground wet except my blanket. And God does it. So I take my blanket outside from my bed, and I said, God, if this is really your call on my life, make everything on the ground wet except my blanket. No, that would have been insane. So I just went outside. I sat in front of my dorm room, right in front of the beautiful beaches of San Diego. And I said, God, I'm not going to leave this spot tonight until you give me a sign. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I said, God, I'm not going anywhere. And I had my phone, and unfortunately, a few years ago, there was no apps, so I was pretty bored. So I was like, dang it, I'm just gonna have to keep praying. So I prayed, and I said, God, I'm not going anywhere until you give me a sign. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I said, God, I'm gonna have to go to class soon. Give me a sign. Pretty soon my phone started to ring. It's like 437 911. I'm like, whatever, I'll answer it. I have nothing else to do. Hello, Byron. I was like, yeah, what's up? This is Grampy. I was like, what's up, Grampy? It's my grandfather from Africa. Good morning. I was like, I guess it's morning in Africa. Yeah, your grandmother and I have been thinking a lot about you, and we were talking to your parents, and they said that you might be interested in seminary or in law school. And I said, oh, well, yeah, I was thinking about it, and they said, well, we just think that seminary is a great thing, and if you were going to continue your education, you should go to seminary. I said, that's amazing. Hey, Grampy, I gotta go. Poof. Got on my knees, face down, and I said, I will go. I don't know what the future holds, God. I don't know what your plans are for my life. I don't know what you want with me, but I will go. And that's step 3 this morning, is that sometimes you just have to say to God, I will. And it's gonna be different for every single person in this room. Not everyone's gonna say, I will go. Every single person is gonna have to say something different. It might be, I will get help. It might be, I will stop this. It might be, I will delete that app. It might be, I will start that nonprofit you've been waiting for years. Maybe it's, I will give more. Or I will beat this finally. But you know what? I truly believe is that you will never leave this behind. You'll never leave your comfort zone behind. And take that chance to soar to what God has waiting for you, your destiny with Him. If you're not willing to change, if you're not willing to say, God, I will. What is it? What's that thing that you need to change? What is it in your mind that you know you need to change? That one thing. Everyone has it in their mind right now. Every single one of you. You know you need to change it. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, just take the first step. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. After the Wright brothers had their first successful public launch in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, they deassembled the whole plane and took it back to Dayton, Ohio. Why? Because they thought that it would be better to put in for a U.S. patent. They thought that they would have more success selling planes and flying planes. They thought that the plane would be a bigger success worldwide and in the future if they could only get their hands on a U.S. patent. That plane sat in a box with the other bikes for 2 years. But finally, the patent came in the mail. Change isn't going to happen overnight. Healing isn't going to happen overnight. Sometimes forgiveness, it's not going to happen overnight. Recovery and change, it might take up to 2 years. But what I want to say is that if you're not willing to take that first step, if you're not willing to say, I will leave my comfort zone, step out of it, and change, then you'll never see the results. You'll never start soaring into that future and into that destiny that God has planned for you. He has great things planned for you. He has a future with Him planned for you. He has a bright, bright future with Him planned for you. He wants you to soar with Him and with your tribe. I know you see these confetti poppers all over the room and right next to you. What I want is for everyone to stand up with their confetti poppers. I want us to take a step together this morning as a church, as a tribe. I want everyone to think about those things in their minds right now. What's the step that you're going to take together? And when Josh counts us down, let's celebrate and pop them. Let's celebrate the changes we're going to make as we soar into this new year together. Josh, count us down.
Confetti poppers in the air. 5, 4, 3, 2,